Welcome to Hope for Anxiety and OCD, episode 43. If you're new to the show, I am your host, Carrie Bach, and on this podcast, we're all about reducing shame, increasing hope, and developing healthy connections with God and others. Today, I'm going to be talking with Kelsey Kemp, a certified career coach. One of the reasons that I wanted to talk about overcoming anxiety related to career and calling is because oftentimes this is an area as Christians where we can really get hung up on what we're supposed to be doing with our lives vocationally. I know for myself, even though I've only had one career per se, I got a master's degree and became a therapist right away. However, along that journey, I've had many different jobs, and I feel like I've learned different things from each of those jobs. And at some point, before I got into my private practice and had my own business, became self-employed, I came to this crossroads really of, I read this book called The Real Adventures of Working Girl about a woman who had a bunch of different jobs. And I sat down, had this prayer time with the Lord and was like, okay, what is the role for me? Where do I thrive? What do I do the best? And it allowed me to, instead of just going and looking for a job that was out there, really mapping out what my ideal job, where my strengths really go, and what fits with me. And so I'm so excited, Kelsey, to have you on the show to talk about some of these things, because I think it's going to be really valuable to people maybe who are anxious about, oh, am I in the right job? Or am I in the right career? Am I too old? Is it too late for me to change? I mean, there's so many questions that anxiety can really keep people stuck in a place where they don't need to be. So thanks for coming on and talking about this with us.
Oh my goodness. Well, now I actually just want to dominate this interview and ask you questions, because all that you said about your exploration of different jobs. And at first I was like, oh, she's a unicorn that stayed in the same career the whole time. But even you acknowledging that you had multiple different facets and roles to how you played that out, I thought that is actually so how callings go a lot of the time. Even if you only figure that out in hindsight,
Right.
that there was something drawing it all together, but there's a lot of ways that you could go about it. But man, do I also relate in what you're saying about how this is like a cesspool for anxiety with career decisions and worrying of, am I going to miss it? Am I going to get it wrong? Am I just going to totally derail God's plan for me? Side note, he's way more powerful than to let you do that. But anyway, yes, thank you. I can't wait to dive in. Obviously, I'm already like chomping out the bit, getting ready to go.
How did you get into this business of helping Christians finding their calling?
Oh, goodness. So I listen to business podcasts all the time. And I recently heard somebody say business is actually just radical empathy. And it's also reminding me of, I'm reading through all the Gospels again right now, of work as a way that we carry out the second greatest commandment. The first being, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. I think I got the order right. I always mess it up. And then the second being, love your neighbor as yourself. So my story very much started with being the person that needed this help. Right out of college, I went into tech consulting. So I was working for a really huge multinational firm. I was in their digital and emerging tech group as a business analyst, helping really large firms develop basically overhaul their antiquated tech systems. And a lot of people, when I would say that, would say, oh, that sounds so cool. And my ego would say, yes, that's why I chose this. Well, that's why I wanted you to say, or that's what I wanted you to think about me. But it was so incredibly dissatisfying. And after 2 years, I really realized that I had spent so much of my academic journey and my young professional journey doing things that others deemed as most valuable or sought after. And it led me to just white knuckle my way into saying, I can do it. Look at what I could do. And over time, that just wears on you. I mean, 2 years, I guess it didn't even take that much time. It wore on me so much to realize that what you're called to do is so much different than just doing what you can. So I was very much suffering in my health, my mental health, and in the bottom of that pit, just so desperate. God, would you please show me what is your will for my life? Isn't that kind of the common prayer? God,
Right.
please show your will for my life. Please show me, please show me, please show me. And after a while, I just realized when I would dwell on Matthew 7:7 of the famous, like, ask and it will be given to you, seek and you shall find, knock and the door will be open to you. That sounds like a pretty active process, actually.
Yes.
And I realized I was waiting for God to actually just write the direct 10-step instruction list on the wall for me. And I felt convicted of my spiritual brattiness, actually. That God, I need you to essentially, I realized, assure me from all discomfort, ambiguity. I want you to confirm that I'm going to have such a significant life of my dreams. And I want you to get me on the direct path to being there without any searching. And so when I realized, oh, okay, I really got to start making this an active process, doing my research, learning about fields that I don't even know exist, because I realized I had a pretty childlike view of what career options were available to me. All the while, God just revealed to me this moment of remembering what my mom always said of necessity is the mother of invention. Again, that's a theme of love your neighbor as yourself. What did I most want? I wanted somebody to help me discern what I was truly called to do occupationally. And so I thought, I'm 24 and I have no idea how to solve that problem. But man, that would be so amazing if one day I figured out the solution and then gave it to other people. So I thought, why don't I just start now? So I signed up to become a certified career coach and started my practice actually earlier in life than I thought I could. Did I get some laughs along the way? Absolutely. Like, it was not lost to me that I was 24 and it's been 3 years since then. Still, I get some laughs, but I've worked with people even in their 60s, executives. God, it has been very, very gracious with me.
That's awesome. That's really awesome. It's just a great testimony of how God uses our struggles and turns it into something beautiful for then you to be able to pass the torch on and like help the next person who was going through what you were going through just a few years ago.
Exactly. He wastes nothing.
Right. So you talked about this a little bit, like where people really are like, okay, God, show me your calling. And I think there can be this anxious component among some Christians of like, okay, what if I miss it? What if like God's calling is some kind of bullseye and I shoot the arrow and I totally end up on the wrong target and I end up in this job that God just doesn't have for me? Or maybe you feel like you're in that job right now. Like, oh gosh, I just feel like I'm totally wasting my time or missing out on what it is God has. And we look at calling as some kind of like big, mysterious thing that we're going to miss it and we're going to mess it up. Like, what would you say to somebody that's dealing with some of that right now?
Yeah, I think one, I will quote Tim Keller most likely in abundance during this interview because he just informs so much of the theology of work that has really helped me come to this point. But one thing he said was, know that God's will is more of something that he does than he gives. And so we want all the clear instructions, but what he actually models for us in the Bible is, it says in Proverbs 16, verse 1 and 9 are quite similar, but 9, it says, a man's plans belong to his heart, but God is the one that it guides his steps. And what does that take? It actually takes lifting your foot and then God will direct it in the right place. But what we see in the parable of the talents, that is probably one of the most foundational scriptures to my career coaching practice, of seeing the parable of the 3 servants, the master who's going away on a long journey gives each of them, he divides his wealth among them, it says, according to their abilities. And he did not give them any instructions at all. But you see that when the master comes back at an unpredictable time, you see that the rules were actually clear all along. He always knew he was going to judge each of them based on what they did in absence of instructions.
Wow.
So and it is so clear. And to the servant who, out of fear, saying, Master, you're a shrewd man. I didn't want to make you angry if I lost any of it. So he buried his talent in the ground. And I like how talent, it's meaning a piece of gold, but actually just in English, it's interesting to think, oh yeah, what about my innate resources of my abilities too?
Sure.
I will bury it in the ground for fear of losing anything. And he said, you wicked and lazy servant. And it reminds me of the Matthew effect too. Those who have little understanding, even what little they have is taken away. But those who have understanding, even more will be given to them. So what did the faithful servants get? They doubled their master's wealth. We don't know if it was by taking it to a certain brand of bank. We don't know if they invested in a certain new crop. That was all up to them. But their result was that they doubled their master's wealth in absence of instructions. And the master said, well done, good and faithful servant. Now come and share in your master's happiness. And that is what work is like to me, that faithfulness, of course, we're here to serve and not be served, but our Father in heaven is so gracious that he does give us joy, fulfillment, purpose, happiness. We're not chasing happiness, but he says, here, that comes from me. I'll give all more than you can imagine when you're faithful. And so to answer your question, just kind of more tangibly, as I think about kind of that bag of gold in the parable of the talents, I imagine us coming into this life and we have all these clues and these breadcrumbs, our internal resources of who God made us to be with our innate talents. When we're reborn in him, in the spirit, our spiritual gifts, our core values that are unique to each of us, our personality, all these things. Those are all context clues that you're meant to multiply those natural, also the opportunities physically that are given to you in the spheres of influence and the abilities and all these things. Multiply those for the glory of God. Pay attention to the breadcrumbs and the context clues and make a wise decision based on what career path, given my research and exploration and talking to many people, do I think would best glorify God and serve others. And I can trust that God's going to also bring me joy through that. I don't have to worry. And that is when I think you can know you're following a calling, because God teaches you so much through action. Clarity comes through action, not just from thinking, and not especially from honestly having a kind of sparse, I will be very honest, prayer life of only saying, God, show me your will. God, show me your will, with your arms crossed in a dark room, refusing to do any research or trusting or taking action.
Sometimes we have to take that risk and we have to try things and see how it works out. And that can be scary at times. I'm just thinking of, different things that I've done, even going to get a master's in counseling. I hadn't ever sat down and talked to a counselor about what their job was like. Looking back on that probably would have been a good idea to do or seeing what kind of careers are available to me afterwards. So but exactly. I knew when I got into that room and I had my first session with someone, it was like there was this wave that came over me, this is it. This is what I'm supposed to do. I just innately knew that. And I didn't know exactly how that was going to manifest out. It's manifested in ways that I couldn't have imagined. But if I hadn't have taken that step to move across the country, to go to graduate school, to try out counseling, then I wouldn't have known. And I know some people that got into that practicum and they had a completely different experience. And they were like, I think I want to do more church type ministry, but maybe counseling isn't the professional nature of it. It's not really for me. I have a friend that uses her counseling degree working in a museum. She's not doing any formal counseling, but she loves what she does. And she works with people and got hired because she could do people, because she has a counseling degree. So it's just incredible how God can steer and guide us. I can't remember the quote, but it's basically something to the effect of God can steer you if you're moving, but it's kind of hard for God to steer you if you're just not moving, if you're standing still.
That's called a whirlpool, actually, if you're just spinning around in circles. Actually, that's what a lot of my most anxious thoughts felt like. It felt like I was spinning when I wasn't just making a decision about my career.
Yeah.
And I again, Tim Keller, he has this whole sermon. I really recommend anyone looks it up on YouTube. It's called Your Plans versus God's Plans. And he excellently breaks down the mystery of God's sovereignty and our free will. And he says, anytime that somebody comes to him and says, what should I do in my career or whatever? He says, make a decision. And they say, oh, how spiritual of you. You're supposed to be a pastor. And making decisions, practicing wisdom is how you become more and more the kind of person who discerns God's will. And I will definitely be sending this episode to people because of what you said of how you were already in the room when you had that feeling of confirmation of calling.
Right.
Wash over you. And it was a feeling of confirmation, not of go do this when you were in high school. I don't know. Or like and you're on the volleyball court and it's just like, hey, Carrie, you're going to be a counselor. that's not how
it's not how it went.
We would love it. But honestly, in the end, I don't think we would want that to happen because God is sovereign and he knows that we have to, through experience, train our hearts to be faithful to him. Right. And especially in ambiguity.
Yes, that's true. And you can pray about things and sometimes you don't have the clearest sense. It's not something that's for or against in the Bible. If it's a very clear, aligned with scripture, okay, this is very clear, I need to do that. Or if it's very not aligned with the values of scripture, then we know, okay, that's not what I should be doing. But many, I'd say most decisions in our life we make, we can't go directly to the Bible to find the answer to that. We have to base it on biblical principles and values of loving God, loving people, what we sense in our spirit, because I do believe that the Holy Spirit speaks to us. And sometimes we just sense that internally of like, oh, this is a no. And I don't even have to know why it's a no. It's just a no.
It
for me.
Is.
Yeah. So we can trust those things that God gives us, but sometimes we just have to say, okay, God, I'm not sure, but this is the decision or the direction that I believe that you're sending me in, and I'm gonna go in that direction and do it. I think that you're spot on with what you're saying.
Yeah. If it's okay, I would like to speak a little bit more to the question of can we miss our callings?
Yeah.
Because I think that there's one more aspect to this conversation of, yes, you and I have just supported a lot of points to say, generally speaking, God will faithfully lead you in that direction. And also we should just know that our free will is not a joke. We're not all the way like puppets on strings. There actually are plenty of options, just like I think our culture is finally releasing our grip on the view of there being the one that you will marry. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of personal choice involved with that as well, though we know that we could trust God. He's guiding us. It's complicated, but what I wanted to say as an additional point of perspective is, and this is hard to admit, it's quite honest, an honest look at life, but we can miss our calling in general, yes, because one, if we look at our primary calling that we see in the Bible, to follow Jesus, to believe in him, to have a salvific relationship, to go and make disciples of all the nations, that's the Great Commission. Right. We see those callings are very direct instructions that are blatantly listed out. Mm-hmm. Do people opt out of those constantly? Yes. Is it unequivocally God's will that we would all follow them? Yes. So why would we believe that we cannot also opt out of faithfulness in all other decisions in life and not reap consequences? Is that harrowing? Yes. I mean, have we all seen that person who has squandered their talents for a lifetime, burying them under many, many excuses that I'm sure are valid, but you could, as an option, trust in God and proceed regardless. But yes, I think that we've all seen that example play out. And so this is something that is harrowing, but important to acknowledge that you can opt out of faithfulness at any point. And why, if you are not communing with your creator and seeing work and your calling as an opportunity to commune with him. And so if you're not even obeying your first command to be in a relationship with him, why would you believe that he would just release you to go have all your idols in the world, which of course you can, but then he will always be knocking at your door saying, come back to me, come back to me. So I'm not sure if that was a little long and winding of an answer, but I have spoken at a few places, and especially students come up to me and they're like, you know what, I was just so encouraged by your talk to know, like, I can't miss my calling. And I thought, wait, did I say that? No.
Uh-oh.
I think that, like, if you're opting into faithfulness, you could trust absolutely that you are a part of God's promises. He's guiding your steps. He's even guiding your words, as it says in Proverbs 16:1. And he is working all things together for your good. For those, what does it say? People just say he's working all those things to your good in Romans 8:28, but they don't mention the last part of that verse. For those that are called according to his purpose, who love him and are called according to his purpose.
Right.
So I think that there is like a pulling up to the bar. And then I think that you could be super secure.
Right. I think about Matthew 6:33, that seek first his kingdom and all these things shall be added to you. It's like if you have your priorities and your perspectives in order and you are seeking God, he's going to lead and guide you in whatever that next piece is, next step. You don't get the whole roadmap. Sorry, that's not how spirituality, Christianity works. I've never gotten the whole roadmap, and I'm not expecting you to either.
No.
But you will get the next piece of the puzzle, the next step along the way.
But like, who would we become if we actually had the full roadmap? Actually, in all of those end of times parables, especially in Matthew chapter 25, the bridegroom didn't announce when he would be coming back, and the virgins with the lamps, it was to test who was faithful. And the master didn't announce when he was coming back from the journey. It was so our true character could be revealed.
Right.
And if we just got all the assurance in the world that here's your life story, one, I don't think we would actually want that. That'd be kind of like, I don't know. I want a little mystery in my life. But then also, this is an opportunity to grow with him in the midst of uncertainty.
Mm-hmm. What would you say, just shifting gears a little bit, to someone who is in a work environment and they don't believe that that aligns with their faith or calling? Like, for example, maybe the company is expecting them to work too many hours and that doesn't align with their God-given need for rest or God-given need to spend time with their family and put them as the priority that they want to. Maybe the company is just all about profits and they don't really care about the people that they're serving or the people that are working for them. What would you say to someone who's in that environment and just not feeling good about it?
Yeah, I would say the same thing to them that I would say to others who are, even maybe they would say they're content at work, but they're starting to get this inkling that maybe there's some greater thing that I could live into for God in my career. Some greater measure of service and use of my vision, my aspirations, my talents. So whether it's a really bad situation or maybe there's something more, my advice is pretty much the same. Be proactive. Do not wait. I'm such a firm believer of, you don't have to marry the first option that comes in your line of vision. You don't.
Yes,
and just
true.
Because you find, I think this could be my next step, doesn't mean that it's time to jump ship tomorrow. But good grief, we all hear that saying, like, start with the end in mind. So essentially you could reverse engineer what you need to do in the meantime. Let's understand what that end is in terms of starting the discernment journey of what are you called to on an overarching level, given who God created you to be very specifically, what he put on your heart to go do or serve, like to help who, doing what, why. And then the last step after that, more bigger vision discernment, is the very practical of, great, what jobs, what role titles, companies would allow me to best carry that out? Mm-hmm. Or what business idea would allow me to carry that out? That's great too. And so then you can only then really kind of reverse engineer. All right, wait. So now that I have that, well, at least I know I could start acting on it at any time I think it's appropriate. And so then it's kind of a more detailed conversation of when do I jump into that next thing? But at least you have started the discernment journey when, here's the key, when, like before you are seeing red and deeply stressed out, there's just, you're a mental health professional. When somebody is in fight or flight, you actually are not able to perceive the reality of the array of options available to you. You physically get tunnel vision.
Mm-hmm.
And so how, therefore, would you be able to perceive some cool thing that maybe otherwise you wouldn't think is possible, or go out and do more research and have more tenacity in that, or make a decision out of faith and not fearfulness? All those things. Start early. I really recommend at least being very thoughtful about exploring, especially through informational interviews. Even if you're slightly interested, or you heard about somebody's job title and you're like, I wonder what that is. Or you have a family friend and you think, they're just doing the coolest thing. Even if you aren't 100% sure, that's the key. Don't make a decision before you actually do research. I find people really force themselves to make career decisions before they know what the day-to-day reality is like in that job, what tasks they would spend the majority of their time doing, what the career outlook, what the growth trajectory is, and if they're okay with all of those things. I find that people do not want to have a coffee chat with someone unless they've already decided, I for sure want to be an HR professional because I'm a people person. And little did they know there's a ton of paperwork involved in that. And also there are so many different specialties in HR, it's mind-boggling. So if you do those informational interviews, you would know that. But I find that people try to decide beforehand so they could treat their networking conversations as I'm just going to say a few things to sound impressive until I could get to the punchline where I ask you to pass on my resume, when actually it should have just purely been a research conversation.
That's good to note, I think. Are there any specific guidelines that you use when helping people evaluate whether it's time to stay or time to go in their job?
There's a couple, and I actually have a free quiz about this on my website that goes through in depth more on each of these criteria, and it's interactive. And it's not meant to make you make a rush decision. That's the point, just to help you predict, okay, what are the number of months that I should really be expecting, and why, if it is a yes, I should leave, why, and what else should I do instead? So that's some of the things that can help. But to run through a few of them right now, one, do you actually want your boss's job or your boss's boss's job? Do you actually, not only maybe on one end, if there are growth opportunities within your current field or your current company, do you want them? Or maybe I've talked to a lot of people that do like their job, but they get frustrated because their current company does not offer advancement opportunities. And that's essential to career satisfaction. So that's one thing. Advancement. Do you have the opportunity and do you want it? And what about your team and your boss? I think there's not too much to be said on that. Is it toxic?
Sure.
Can you trust your management? I think that's something to take quite seriously because I've seen people booted out. I've seen bad reports given that are not merited. If you actually cannot trust your management, then I have a dear friend right now who's going through that, not merited whatsoever. That is truly something to get out of quickly. What about, are you interested in the subject matter of your work whatsoever? Maybe you've been sticking around because you enjoy your coworkers, and there's a few perks, and you have a really cool summer party and a Christmas party, and you like those things, or your end of year serviceman is just the best and you want to stick around for that, or the health insurance, it's just premium. But what about the actual tasks that you're doing? Do they agree and utilize your innate abilities? If not, or if not all the way, I think that's something that we could always maximize. When you truly find your point of creative genius, which I believe exists in everybody, and you find what task reveals that, because maybe you haven't stumbled upon the thing that reveals it. Again, test, experiments. Then, oh man, you don't even know what sense of flow, like buzzing, focus, and satisfaction, that kind of like, and God got to the end of the 6 days, kicked back and said, that was very good. That kind of feeling. You were missing out. So maybe it's not like, I hate this or it's so terrible, but maybe you could just maximize, again, like multiplication. Divine multiplication is a huge theme, especially in the Gospels.
I think something you have to take the step back at and say, is it my actual job duties that I'm not liking? Or is it the job duties? Like, is it the structure of how this company has structured the job duties? Like, maybe I really enjoy my job, but the boss is super micromanagey, or the coworkers are always whining and griping and complaining. It's just like a negative environment to be in. And so sometimes it's hard to tease those things out because you just look at it as one whole picture. But I think like what you're saying is it's like, do I need a different company where I could do the same thing, but maybe have more freedom,
Yeah.
autonomy, better benefits, whatever it is? Or do I need to be doing something, a different type of task because I'm just not passionate about this the way that I was in the past? And those kind of things can shift and change for sure. And you have to kind of tune
Totally.
in and pay attention to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And the last thing I'll say on this is you are allowed to see a measure. When we say responsibility, our culture often means hunkering down and like counting the 10 beans that you were given and making sure nothing happens to them. That really sounds like the unfaithful servant. But
Right.
actually, I think responsibility should be more defined by I assessed everything that God gave me and everything that I really believe is such a God-given desire that he put on my heart. And I did my darndest with it. Like I just went for it. A lot of wisdom is not deciding between good or bad. It's deciding between best or better. And I think that I just want to say you are allowed to change jobs. That doesn't mean that you're a bad person. That doesn't mean you're a bad Christian. That was a big deal for me because my main idea of the theology around work that I grew up around was, and I'm not blaming any pastor because, they're not a career coach. They're not obsessed with studying the Bible through the lens of career ethics as I am. That's okay. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing. But what I did pick up was to be a good Christian at work is to just take whatever God gave you, which, by the way, releases all agency from yourself. And whatever job is right in front of you, you just have to take it. That's kind of the read between the lines that I got. And you just have to be excellent at it, which, again, the read between the lines is just stick in it and make sure that you perform better than everybody else. So one day somebody's like, Jim at the water cooler, why are you so much better of a CPA than everybody else? Will you share the gospel with me? And that's just not how it works. Like, honestly,
Right.
due to common grace, like, oh my gosh, non-Christians and Christians, non-Christians can be so much better at a job than Christians can. That's fine. So
Mm-hmm.
anyway, I think faithfulness is just choosing for better or choosing the better, not just managing only what you have, expanding your impact for the kingdom. You don't have to stay where you're at.
That's so good. That's so good because I've talked with clients who have felt guilt over leaving their job. Like, I don't want to leave my manager in a bad place. They're just very conscientious of what other people are experiencing or thinking, or they're not wanting to disappoint someone. Maybe this coworker helped me get this job. I feel like I shouldn't leave, or there's so many emotions that can get tied up in those things, even when we know clearly, like in our mind and in our spirit, no, it's time. Like
It
it's
is
time to
time.
move on.
And if the Spirit is telling you that, and you know that you will be able to glorify God more and serve others better in another place, then please trust the Lord to fill that seat with somebody better, which is very humbling. Okay. But
Wow. Yeah.
he has the whole puzzle mapped out. Please, your only concern is to follow him and play your piece. He will figure out the rest. I also speak with clients that are they see so many problems in the world. I think that, this was a big part of my quarter life crisis. There's so many things I care about, so many things I'm grieved by. The most loving thing you could do is to pick the one I don't want to say just pick one because that always freaked me out. But what about in a more playful way, pick the one that you're drawn towards most and trust God to be God and you to be a human who could probably just do one thing super duper well.
Right.
He will fill out the rest.
That's good. This has just been a really great conversation. I've enjoyed it so much.
Likewise.
At the end of the podcast, I like to ask every guest to share a story of hope, which is a time where you've received hope from God or another person.
I cannot wait for the story that I'm about to share. So I actually wish I received this from someone in person, but admittedly, I heard it on a podcast, but it was just too good not to tell all my friends about, even still to this day. This instilled so much awe in me. Like, wow, God is so big and I'm so small. Of when this pastor in a country in the Middle East, undisclosed, he is ruthlessly going out and risking his life, sharing the gospel all the time. And even though he really is, I think, I wanted to say like taking everything in his hands as much as he can, I would rather say he's stewarding his job as much as possible. He's initiating conversations about God everywhere he goes, but still in humility, he said, don't get it wrong. Like, God is the only one that could save someone. And it reminds me of the loaves and the fishes of your job is only, I love how Dallas Jenkins, the creator of The Chosen, he says this. He says, your job is only to bring the 5 loaves and the 2 fishes for Jesus to bless. Even if you're like, Jesus, like there's 5,000 people here. There's no way this feels really dumb. Bring it to him. And it is not your job to feed the 5,000. It is only your job to bring the loaves and the fish. Jesus is the one that will multiply it for the 5,000. So similarly, this guy, he's saying, God is the one who saves. Let me give you an example. I went out into an incredibly rural village, has almost no contact with the outside world. I went into this one man's tent and I was telling him about the gospel. And this man said, oh, I've heard of these things. And the pastor's like, how? Like, this is so remote. And it's a predominantly Muslim country. And he said, a man dressed in white has been coming to my tent every single night for months. And he's been telling me to write things down. And the pastor said, show me what he's told you to write down. Wow. Word for word, it was the entire book of John from the Gospels.
Wow. In his language.
In his language.
That's incredible.
Yeah. So that's what God means when he says, I am the one who calls you. But like he said to Moses, I made you have a mouth. Okay. Mm-hmm. All I need you to do, I don't even need you. It says in Acts 17, as if he is served by human hands. He's not. Mm-hmm. He could do this all himself, but he knows for our hearts that we need to participate with him because as a gift, it's a gift to him or to us actually, and to him. But anyway, he says to Moses, I gave you your mouth. I'll also give you the words to say to Pharaoh. I'm really just asking you to walk into his court. And he is the one who calls us, but all of our callings are for him and for his glory, and they will be done through his strength, achieving the results that he always wanted for himself. He just wants our faithful hearts to say, even though this seems ridiculous, I guess I'll build the ark. Even though this seems ridiculous, I'll lift up the loaves and the fishes. Even though I feel so scared, I'll go into Pharaoh's temple. I think that's how our careers are supposed to feel. Not fearful, because he commands us to fear not. And he commands us to not worry. And that's not like the disciples said at one point in the gospel. They were like, how is that possible? You're asking us to be perfect. And Jesus said, yes, with man, this is impossible, but with God, all things are possible. So he's not asking you something that you can't do in him. You need not worry, literally, but we can live quite gloriously on the edge for him. And that is what I really hope to help people do through my practice.
That's awesome. I love it. Well, Kelsey, we're going to put the links to your website in the show notes so that people can find you. And my assistant's going to go through and pull all the scripture references to scriptures that you mentioned today. And so we'll put those in there if people want to do some study on those passages. I think that would be awesome.
That's the best thing you could do. Let God preach to your heart, not me.
Oh, thanks for being on the show today.
Oh, thank you so much. This was just the most jubilant conversation.
One addendum that we forgot to talk about is that Kelsey has a podcast as well called Answer the Call. So if you like what you heard today and you want to hear more, go check out Kelsey's podcast as well. She has a link through her website that we're going to put in the show notes. If you have been a regular listener to our show, I would love it if you could rate and review us on iTunes or other platforms that you listen on that allow reviews. That really helps people find our show and validate that we're talking about good things. So I appreciate you so much for listening and taking the time to do that. Hope for Anxiety and OCD is a production of By the Well Counseling in Smyrna, Tennessee. Our original music is by Brandon Mangrum. Until next time, may you be comforted by God's great love for you.